Hey, everybody, it's Courtney Bowden here, host of the Think Like a Thought Leader TV show and podcast, where Black entrepreneurs and leaders like you come to learn how to increase their impact, influence, and revenue related to the work you do in the world. Now, in this special CEO therapy edition of the show, I'm here with PASSUH. Danyelle Thomas, founder of the Unfit Christian. And today we're going to be talking about what happens when crisis disrupts your faith. Now, but first, Danyelle, can you take a moment to tell those who aren't familiar with you about your mission and the work that you do?
So again, I am Danyelle Thomas. I am the founder, owner, content creator, all things Unfit Christian. It is a space where we work to unpack those intersections that meet faith, gender, sexuality, race, all of the big buckets of isms. We work to unpack that as a progressive faith space, largely centering around Black lives. Now, I'm a Black woman, so that's who I center. This work impacts people of other ethnic groups, but definitely my center is around the Black church experience, the Black Christian experience, and moving beyond that into a progressive Christian faith or even into other traditions such as Afro tradition religions or agnosticism, atheism. I do help people transition from Christianity into those paths as well. I kind of really am that person you come to when you have done church for so many years. It no longer resonates with you, but you're trying to decide if you want to keep the God concept in your life or you need to find a way to practice a spiritual faith that feels fulfilling and aligns with who you are as a person. I have had the honor of being mentioned in many news platforms. I have had the honor of sitting on the Smithsonian National Museum for African American History and Culture stage as a panelist. I've had many different honors and opportunities, but my favorite part is always helping people realize that there's room for the cross in all of us, no matter how radically different our approach to faith is. So that's, as quick of a summary as I can give you.
No, that's incredible. And I have to say that I first encountered you online, but I remember when I can't remember, I don't even know if this was last year or this year, but I mean, last year or the year before last, but you were on a panel and it was at either Morehouse or Spelman.
So that was the God Talk panel from the Smithsonian.
Yes.
That was last January. Nothing has happened this year except the Rona. So
Rona. And we're going to talk about the Rona. And speaking of the Rona, COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on our people, economy, systems, and infrastructure. But you say it's also revealed a lot about our churches and faith leaders. And to be quite honest, I've seen a lot of pastors still congregate even before there were shelters in place and things like that. Some of them, decided that that's what they wanted to do. That's what they felt led to do, even in the midst of what is a highly contagious virus that has been proven to spread with physical contact. And so I've been making phone calls to my older church-going family all week long, all last week, advising them to stay home, even if their churches are open and still congregating. And you've been incredibly outspoken about all of this. What do you believe is the responsibility of pastors and faith leaders during this critical time?
The reality is that it's kind of exposing this lack of preparation for such a time as this. And that's a very churchy phrase, such a time as this, right? And so we are experiencing now the outcomes of what it means to not remember that being a Christian doesn't give us an automatic pass against having to live in the real world and have contact with what's happening in the real world. It's not a guard against being impacted by life. And so now we find ourselves in this space where we have these churches who, despite the continued conversations and outcry about how the church needs to transition, we find churches who have refused to do that to this point. So they don't want to come into modern technology of having digital services, of organizing organizing in such a way where it is easy to transition from doing service traditionally in the sanctuary to being able to simply do it online without missing a beat. We are finding pastors whose theology at this point is coming into question. When you have a leader who is telling you, despite us being in the age, in a space, in a country, so speaking specifically to the United States, where we now lead the number of cases, we have high numbers of deaths, and it's a highly contagious virus. Everybody with a modicum of sense is saying stay at home. You now have pastors whose theology does not support that, because their whole mindset is this whole all things work together for the good of those who believe, and Jesus is my protector and Jesus is my help. It's teaspoon theology, if I'm just going to be 100% real with you. It is a very evident case of not knowing God beyond an inherited theology. So when I say inherited theology, I basically mean you believe what your mama and them believed about God because it was your mama and them, and then her mama and them, and then her mama and them. So it just becomes this cycle of I'm going to believe what you told me about God, but not necessarily have a concept or an idea of how to believe God from what I know to be true of God. Because so many of us have not actually taken the time to really add any depth or sea legs to our relationship, to our faith, and to our concept and ideology of who God is to us and for us. So now we're being hit with crisis. We have this COVID-19, and you have preachers out here who are basically making it a pissing contest about my God is greater than COVID. My God is greater than all of this. You can believe all that, faith and action. I believe that God is greater than a pandemic virus, but I also take action by keeping my ass inside the house. Like, like that's my faith. Like those two do not have anything like where it's just okay, that don't match, it don't add up, can't do that. Like this goes like those things do not counteract one another for me. I have faith and I believe in God, and I believe that God will bring us and see us through this. However, I do also understand that there will be casualties. There will be people who have died, obviously, and will continue to die from this. And this idea that like you're so special, this idea of just being God's special snowflake and saying I'm going to still gather in complete rejection of what has been told to me by all the authorities in place. Now, mind you, these are usually the same Christians who very much believe in all government having the authority based on the Bible, right? But suddenly that comes, that just get washed away when they tell them they can't go to church. Now we don't believe in the government having authority anymore.
Very interesting.
Right. But you have a case of that happening because people just really have not been honest with themselves about the depth of their relationship, and it's now impacting how they do leadership and those who come under submission to them. And I think we're going to continue to endanger people with this idea of favoritism, because to me, it would be like, I would be remiss to not say that some of these people who have died are probably practicing Christians. So are we saying that like, I'm more special than them because I happen to live and they didn't? Like, what are we saying here? What is the message we're giving to the world and to each other? What are we saying about our faith? What are we saying about the God that we love if we approach this as a favor, a fair type of thing? This ain't about this. This is really, to me, in my honest opinion, I'm gonna stop talking so you can ask another question. In my honest opinion, this really boils down to ego. This is really less about God and more about folks' ego when we talk about still having church physically, still gathering physically in the name of Jesus to have services in spite of knowing the harm that can come from that.
And you make a lot of really strong points. And I'm sure that for those who are either listening or watching, some are probably shaking their heads or saying, that's interesting. So what I think, and I've been telling everybody I know and come in contact with, is this time it has really revealed a lot. It has exposed a lot. I feel like this is a season of exposure. And
Girl, touch your neighbor and say God is exposing some folks. Well, social distance, touch your neighbor.
Right.
Just put your hand to the monitor and say God is exposing some folks. Because you're not wrong. You're not wrong at all.
Ooh, don't have me clowning on this live stream on today.
All right, we're not going to act up. We're not going to act up. Okay.
But I feel like with all of this time, this newfound time, I think for a lot of people, because there are some people who have been spending time by themselves and seeking and all of this beforehand. Absolutely. Which I think, you know, we can see sort of the difference between those who have been spending time and those who are just thrust into or forced into spending time to really re-examine what it is that they believe, right? So I know that you keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on in faith communities and specifically among millennials of faith. But what are you finding? How are the conversations going among people who are now trying to really renegotiate what COVID means and how it impacts their faith walk? Do you think that essentially, in your perspective and from what you've been able to see, do you think that people feel like they're getting fed at their churches, or do you feel like they are starting to say, I don't know about all of that? Are they starting to question, or not yet? Or is it a spectrum?
I think it's a spectrum, and I think it's, so this is a both and. I think it's a spectrum, and I think there's a not yet here. So I think, and I'm speaking for myself personally, every day something changes with COVID. Every day something changes with how we're proceeding in this world, how we're moving, what new normal looks like. Here's one thing for sure, and two things for certain, is that we're never going to go back to the normal that we had before this virus. This is the same way as it was before 9/11. We still have security measures in place, which by all statistics has not reduced the number of terrorist attacks. And anybody with a common sense is going to say, like, they're not going to come the same way again, but yet we still haven't changed the way we've been doing business with airlines and security measures since 2001. And here we are almost literally 20 years later still doing that. So what we're coming out of now with COVID, when we do finally come out, things will never be the same. The way, as you have said, this is a season of exposure. Capitalism is being exposed. The cross is being exposed. Celebrities are being exposed. I seem like I'm using all things with C's. All of these things are being exposed and showing that there are ways that we are doing things now that we could have always done. Yes. Such as the way we are caring for our working class, our impoverished folks, by saying, hey, we're going to suspend, bill cuts, or I'm sorry, not bill cuts, but service cuts. So like your utilities, rent for some folks, other kinds of businesses. I think I get an email almost every day from businesses, and I'm like, child, I only see y'all online, like COVID ain't got nothing to do with this, but they are still sending out these kinds of notifications. So everybody's kind of adjusting the way we do business and showing some measure of kindness and consideration for the fact that this is a huge financial impact, which means this is something we could have been doing all along, because COVID is like clearly a large example of this, but financial impact has been going on well before we even got hit with COVID. But, and I'm going somewhere with this. Stay with me, bless you. And so, I say this not yet when it comes to how people are relating to churches, because even still, as a lot of us are getting more serious about protecting ourselves in the time of the Rona, is kind of the same group of people who are also kind of like, it's not that big because it hasn't hit home yet. Mm-hmm. So they may not know somebody personally who has it. I actually do know a few people who are personally self-quarantined right now because they have tested positive for COVID. And that's just not in my position of being a reluctant pastor, but just having a wide net of folks. So I actually am more closely impacted. I have a parent who is almost 60. I have older people in my life. I have immunocompromised folks in my life. So this has kind of always been very real to me, but there's still a not yet segment of the population for whom this is an inconvenience, but it's not real for them. And so it's
Mhm.
the same thing with church congregations. It's an inconvenience, but it's not real for them yet. They haven't, it's kind of a lot like Trump supporters. Now they're kind of starting to defect and go, wait a minute, my savior is now the person who's killing me by their bad
Mm.
decisions.
Mhm.
And so I'm thinking the same thing is going to happen with the church as we continue to go on and we continue to expose this faulty, improper planning, faulty theology of the people who lead us, all of these things. I think that's where the not yet is. I think it's a spectrum. So I think beforehand, you already had people who were questioning their faith. Hello, I'm
Mhm.
master of those people. Um, but also, I think you have people who, or you have people who, no matter what, they're going to continue to hold so dearly to everything they have known to be normal, not because they are just unwilling to change. That's part of it. But we have to interrogate why there's an unwillingness to change. And for some of them, it's tradition. And it's not because they love the tradition so much, it is because they love what the tradition is associated with. Some
Ooh.
people associate those traditions with a loved one who has passed on now. Some
Mhm.
folks associate those traditions with better memories and better times in their lives, an easier time, a more comfortable time, a time where they maybe had less stress, less obligation, less whatever. There were those opportunities there to give them that comfort that they may not feel in this time of uncertainty. And so they want to cleave very much to those traditions, no matter how harmful they may be. It still feels comforting. And a lot of people in general struggle with change because it means accepting what is unknown. It means saying no to what you already know and saying yes to what you don't know in order to progress forward. And I think that's difficult for anybody. But I think by and large, the millennial population was already kind of feeling like, eh. And then
Right.
to see pastors respond in the way they did, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, or a um, what's the word I'm looking for? A silo of information. It was kind of like uh, a circle affirmation, if it makes sense. It's kind of like I already knew it, and now this just confirms it. I already knew that's how churches were. I already knew that's how pastors were. I already knew they prioritized money over people. I already knew they prioritized themselves over the people. And now here we are experiencing something that puts that on Front Street. So that's long-winded explanation for why I think it's a both and there. It's
Mhm.
a not yet and
Mhm.
a we're definitely in a spectrum there of how people are responding to this.
Mm. Okay. So now, I don't know about you, but I've
Mhm.
seen my fair share of social media posts with people talking about how they believe this pandemic is a result of God's wrath. What are your thoughts on that?
I think people have some very sadomasochistic relationships with God.
Ooh, can you say more?
I just think people work on this system where it's a system of reciprocity. If I put in good to God, I should get good back out. So that lottery system. If I give God a little tit, God better give me a little tat. All pun intended when I said a little tit. Like, God better give me back what I render unto him or unto her, however your pronouns are with God. Most people say him, and most people are thrown off when I say her. Let's hold the conversation. Um, I think the reality is that people have such a masochistic relationship with God that they can only explain the world in terms of dichotomies of we've been really good, so we're really blessed, or we've been really bad, so we're really not blessed. I do not at all think that this is a reflection of, first of all, I don't think that's how God operates. I think we attribute too much to the devil, but I think we also attribute too much to the wrath of God too. I think this is literally just a natural, it's just something that happened. We try to over spiritualize it as something much deeper, as something much more nefarious and tied up and tangled up in sin and sanctification. That's bullshit. At the end of the day, this is happening literally just because it's a natural occurrence of some human error that created a virus that now unfortunately has mutated in such a way it is killing thousands of people. Period. I don't think that's a matter of God hates us and now we're being punished, and like I hate that narrative about God. I despise that narrative where God is just constantly looking for ways to punish us in our lives. I think that's why so many of us have weak relationships with God. And that's why a lot of people walked away from church and relationship and theism altogether. It's because we, as church folks, made God our personal arbiter for things that we felt wronged about. So we started sticking God on people. So if church folks are sitting up here going, oh, this is a matter of sin, what that is thinly veiled language to say is this is what I told y'all was going to happen when y'all out here living all just having sex with anybody, abortion and same gender marriage is really the kind of the big thing in the Black church. Church in general, evangelical churches in general. So I'm not just going to make that a Black thing. That's the evangelical church thing. Right. But when you have people, to me, when I see that, and you're not the only one, I definitely have seen it. When I see that, that's a lot of thinly veiled coded language around a personal education of, or a personal adjudication of what we believe to be right or wrong, sinful or not sinful, but I also see it as a mark of immature theology. So that's that on that.
That on that.
That's that on that.
Marilyn says, come on, Pastor, in the comments. So I want to take a quick moment to acknowledge how privileged we are to be able to sit in a comfortable shelter during this madness. For that, I'm very grateful for. Now, there are pockets of vulnerable communities where the virus has not just impacted health, but finances too. And we have seen the integration of those two. And that's another thing that has been exposed about our country's healthcare system, because we know that the overwhelming amount of debt that people have is related to healthcare or medical bills, right? So how can people of faith serve in quarantine while observing social distancing? I've seen, I wonder what is happening to, our brothers and sisters who are experiencing homelessness, who might be experiencing living in unsafe conditions, right? I know that I read somewhere that the domestic violence calls have increased. So not everybody has the safe place to quarantine. And I think it's a little bit myopic. It's a lot of bit myopic to assume that when we say stay home, that everybody can stay home and wants to stay home, not just, because they want to go out and kick it, but because their safety and their very soul is at risk, right? So what can we say to those people? What can those people do? And how can people of faith serve while in quarantine?
So first, I want to tell my personal story about this healthcare system, and I'll talk about this at length in my own video. But I had to have surgery last month in February because I had a menstrual cycle that went on for 6 months, and I do mean a straight 6 months of menstrual bleeding.
Wow.
Turned out that I had polyps inside of my uterine lining, which had to be removed. So it was an hour and 15-minute procedure that costs almost $18,000 just to have a regular hysteroscopy, which is just to look inside of my uterus with a camera, and to have a dilation and curettage, which is just a straight up DNC, and to have an IUD inserted so that I would not have a repeat of this issue. $18,000. I have insurance. That's a privilege. I still had to spend almost $1,500 out of pocket and there's still medical bills rolling in. Now, place that in context with every day even those of us who are fortunate enough to have a home, to have a job where we can work remote, which I happen to be one of those people. I've been working remote for almost a month now. Prior to that, I was already a frequent teleworker anyway, but I have that privilege. But we're all in a space where our companies, because we still live in a capitalistic society, we're all still kind of hoping, for those of us who aren't full-time business owners, we're all still hoping, am I going to be essential? Am I going to still have a job? Am I going to be able to pay my mortgage? And so, like, those are factors and stressors that are happening. And these are the things that our faith leaders have to speak to. Now, I told that story about, my medical situation because even with insurance, I still have to find money. And so now I think about it, if I had waited until this month to have that surgery, it would have been canceled. And so I would have still been dealing with the menstrual cycle issue that I was dealing with previously, because that is not a priority in the hospitals right now. The priority is taking care of people who are seriously, critically ill, including those with COVID-19. So where does that leave those of us who have other issues that we need medical care? And the interesting thing is, I think about just women in general, like, or people with uteruses, because everybody who menstruates is not a woman.
Right.
But people who menstruate, if you have an issue right now with your cycle, you can't go to urgent care. Urgent care doesn't provide gynecological services. You can't go to the hospital because you're not a priority. And your doctor's offices are starting to take fewer and fewer appointments because they're trying to protect themselves against COVID-19. And so that's just an issue that I have personal experience with. But that is an issue that if you lift up the basic tenets of it and apply it to any other medical situation, it's something that's being replicated for other people who have medical needs, who have chronic illness, who would normally spend more time than usual in the hospital, but now are not being prioritized as patients. So what does that mean as a faith leader? As I have said before, when I talk about why millennials are making such an exodus in the church, this is the time to speak truth to power. This is the time to have real conversations about how real life is happening, and not talking about heaven anyhow and we gonna get there by and by after a while. How are you going to speak to those fears and those anxieties that are really creeping up? You mentioned, like, some of us are fortunate to be at home, and we actually have a place to call home, and that's wonderful. But some of us are at home by ourselves, and we
Yeah.
have anxiety diagnoses, and we have depression diagnoses, and we may not have those diagnoses, but we definitely have the symptoms and the illness and disease itself. And so isolation is not helping. Frequent news consumption is not helping. So
Mm-mm.
where can the faith leaders plug in? By having real conversations about how real life is happening, being transparent. If you are a faith leader who is being impacted by this in a way that resonates with other folks, show folks that your feet are made of clay too. So as a faith leader myself, reluctant or not, I speak out and say, hey, yeah, I'm by myself. And this time by myself of living alone, as an extrovert, and I'm very much an extrovert, it's been difficult. Even just getting in my car and driving around the neighborhood has been a release, or just going
Yeah.
to go get some food has been a relief. But I wake up and I lay down and I'm by myself. I'm consuming the news through, all of the social platforms, and it's constant, right? So every
Mhm.
time you turn around, every few posts you scroll, there's something new, there's some breaking news, there's something. That bothers me as somebody who has been diagnosed with chronic stress anxiety. So as a leader, it's my responsibility to have these kind of candid conversations to say, I'm not only here with you as somebody who empathizes, I'm someone who's experiencing it. How do we get real about it? We create resources where possible. We create community where possible, even virtually as a social distancing. I have been preaching about the digitization of church for years. Like, that is
Yeah.
literally how the future of church is going to have to be operated. If you're going to survive, you've got to go digital. If you're going to survive, you've got to understand or get beyond this whole bullshit cliche we like keep saying like it's just the internet. We are far beyond trying to separate our lives intrinsically from what happens online and what happens offline. We are so beyond it at this point.
We are. We
People
are.
don't stop existing to me just because I turn off my devices. I'm thinking about these folks constantly. I'm engaged with them. Their lives are intertwined with mine and mine with theirs. Like, we are beyond that. So now that we understand that and we understand that community matters, how do we cultivate community in this time? That's where our faith leaders have to focus. I think about affected populations in the church, for our older, our seasoned members. Church is their
Yes.
social space.
That's it. That's it. My grandmother is 93 years old and she has car keys
Mhm.
and very sprightly, of great health. And the family is basically switching off duty, calling her, making sure that she's sitting her butt at home,
Yeah.
because her church has not yet embraced the digital age. They don't do
Mhm.
streaming. And I'm not sure if they're currently meeting, this week, but
Mhm.
there are pockets of populations and communities, especially smaller church congregations, that have not yet embraced it. Probably, partly because of budgetary reasons. It does take real money to invest in the kind of tools and platforms needed.
Mhm.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, for I don't know how many years, church has been a place of social refuge for a lot of people. I mean,
Mhm.
and it I hate to be, the grandchild that calls and says, okay, are
Right.
you at home, are so you're absolutely right about our elders and what it is, what can they do to still remain in fellowship. Again, how can churches still keep people in fellowship in the
Mhm.
digital age?
So for me, so I do want to backtrack on one thing when we talk about cost prohibitive for streaming. That's true if you want to have a good polished stream, but you could bust up on your phone, go live on YouTube, on Facebook, YouTube, almost like any social
Yeah,
platform at this point, and you've got a basic stream.
yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah,
enough
yeah.
to at least give the people what they need, what they desire, what they're looking for. Now, if you want to get all, mega church fancy, you need mega church money. But for just a basic stream, like, you can go live. It's only as cost prohibitive as you make it.
That's
But
true.
I think so. That's why I said some of it is resources, but a lot of it is just being stiff necked and saying that's not the way we do church. That's not the way we've ever done church. It's the only one to do church the way that I know how to do it, and that's just that on that. And it's like, that's not how it works. So now, what is happening in part is the issue that has been existing for the modern church for at least the last 2 decades, is how do you manage all of the different generations? And the reason I concentrate that on the last few decades is because for millennials like us, like, we're older millennials, and so we come from that age, that in between age. So I
Yeah,
grew up and still remember when you didn't have to dial a area code to call somebody.
right.
I grew up where you still had, like, call waiting was a fancy feature. Caller ID was a fancy feature,
That was
right?
a premium feature.
Listen. And, like, I grew up where the caller ID was a separate box from the phone. I
Yes.
grew up
Yes.
like in all of these transitions. And so I remember life before the internet, but now that it's here, that piece of technology has changed the way we do life, period. And so these churches now find themselves in these last couple decades of, how do I manage all these different generations? And that's like a church here in Atlanta, a House of Hope, Great Travelers Rest Baptist. E. Dewey Smith is the pastor there. He talks a lot about being one church, 3 generations. So he
Mhm.
talks a lot about trying to manage and meet the needs of all of these generations. Now, I'm partial to Dewey because Dewey was best friends with my dad until his death in
Mhm.
2016. So
Mhm.
I just happen to know his ministry more than others. I know he's not the only person doing that. But this is kind of the challenge that the church leaders are facing, is how do you create community? And now the pre-work that could have been done it's now almost too late to do, because we should have been moving our senior population towards digitized church before we had to force digitized church, right? So we
Yeah.
should have made
Yeah.
sure that, like, do they have access to a web enabled device?
Right.
If they don't, how do we set something up? Like, what is the education that needs to happen to make sure that they still feel part of the community? Now we're in a place where there's just fewer options with social distancing and them being a very
Yeah.
vulnerable population. Like, there's just so few options. The best thing I could hope for is that, like, they have younger family members that could come in the home and, set up things for them, and that their churches are willing to go digital. But there just is very little solutioning there based on the precautions that have to happen for
Yeah.
their health, for our own health. But this is a big lesson in what it means to manage generations across your church congregation. You literally can't just focus on the needs of one and expect it to all go successfully. We see what happens when that happens. Now you don't have any kind of connection, any kind of social anything for these churches, or for the seniors in our churches. And I'm just not sure how we solution something that will meet them where they are while keeping them safe and keeping ourselves safe too. It's a difficult place.
Yeah, and I think that we'll continue to see how that all shakes out as, things continue to unfold. I think that we'll really see where the chips fall
Mhm.
after the pandemic is over, and hopefully our church leaders won't have such short memories and try
Mhm.
to go back to what was normal before the pandemic. So are you
Right.
optimistic about there being, because you mentioned earlier in our conversation
Mhm.
that our lives will forever be changed
Mhm.
because of this pandemic, right? You acknowledge that, but I'm not exactly sure if there are a lot of people who acknowledge that, especially people in leadership positions, right?
Mhm.
I get the sense that there are going to be a large population or a large pocket of leaders, and I'm not just talking about church leaders, I'm talking about leaders in general,
Mhm.
but for the context of this conversation, we'll say church leaders or faith-based leaders who will attempt to go back to what things used to be. And
Mhm.
so I just wonder, and none of us have a crystal ball here, but I just wonder how many will actually take this opportunity as, take the learnings from what happened here and implement. Are you optimistic that there are going to be enough leaders in the church who actually will implement the newfound understanding?
I'm optimistic that there will be some leaders who do that. I am not optimistic that there will be enough leaders who do that. But I say this, and I want to give a preliminary statement to it, that this applies to more than just church. So this is
Yes.
for any entrepreneur that's listening in any niche, any area of business that you work in. I think this would apply to you too. When this is all over, I should wear a crown. No, that's just me being churchy. When this is all over, people are going to return to that which they could trust in the time of trouble. And
Can you say that again?
they're
Can
going to
you say that again?
return to people they could trust in the time of trouble. And I say that to say is they're going to trust those who remain consistent. They're going to
Mm,
trust those who showed up as their whole selves, who showed up in a way that acknowledged what was going on in a very real and applicable way, as well as gave them a sense of comfort, gave them a sense of direction, a sense of peace, a sense of hope in this time. That is who people are going to return to. Be that your church, be that your business selling lashes, be that your hair business, your nail business, your coaching business, whatever it is that you do, people in this time are looking for folks who show up as their consistent selves. That's why even in this time of financial uncertainty, of all the uncertainties that you can bucket that's happening now, it's important for entrepreneurs to still continue to remember that they have to pay their bills too.
Yeah.
It's still important for them to remember that this is not a time to stop selling your product. This is
That's
not a
it.
time to stop pushing your product. It's not a time to stop pushing who you are as a brand. And for those of us who happen to be entrepreneurs and people of faith, some of that may make us want to go, okay, well, how can I give of myself from an empty space? Remember that you are trying to navigate this too. And so my problem has never been with churches remaining open for business in this time for the sake of collecting tithes and offerings. So in the day, all the bills have to be paid in the church. There are people who are employed by the church. Salaries still have to be paid. Like, I'm very practical in that way. My problem is always when we are dishonest in why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
So if we're dishonest and we are forcing people to come out of church because we want them to prove their faith, and that if they really had the faith, they wouldn't be worried about no virus because they know Jesus is bigger. Like, no, tell the truth. Just be honest and say, listen, we want you to stay home. We want you to do service with us virtually. For our seniors, I was just thinking about this. If they don't have, internet, they got a phone. So, have a call-in line that they can hear, a conference line, something. We want you to join us in the ways possible. Yes, while we still fellowship together, do community. However, we still have bills to pay. So please still remit your tithes and offerings to this Givelify, Cash App, whoever y'all use as y'all platform, and make that be the thing. But be honest about it, because people are going to return to what they can trust. And this is going to get worse before it gets better. Let me say that. And as it continues to get worse and you continue to underperform and you continue to demonstrate yourself as not being trustworthy, people will remember that when the storm is over. And so I think I go back to my original statement. Yes, I have optimism that there will be leaders who change, but I don't think there will be enough. And to be honest with you, if you don't change and you do continue down this path, you deserve what comes. That's what you chose. If your church closes, you deserve that. If you lose your, position as a pastor, you deserve that. You earned that. That's what you chose in this situation. So I say the same thing to entrepreneurs who are not faith leaders, but are just people of faith. You have to continue to lead your people. You have to continue to give them a sense of normalcy in a time where nothing is normal. So if you're somebody who, as a business owner, is used to showing up on live, keep showing up. If you're somebody who's used to, making pre-made video content, keep doing that. If you're somebody who sells a product, do these things. Even if you're adjusting the price or you're adjusting your payment models or whatever, people are expecting some sense of normalcy. Because I don't know about you, Courtney, but I know on my timeline, people still talk about wanting to spend money. All they want to do is go out and go to the store and spend money. Even when these stimulus checks come in, people are like, what am I going to do to spend my money? Right? So folks are still trying to spend. I know I've been on Poshmark looking for stuff to buy anyway. So I go on all these different websites. I start carts and then I don't finish it. But the point
I started a cart today because there's an anniversary sale for one of my favorite online stores, and I'm just trying to hold on.
See, and so we're still out here, even in all this uncertainty. One thing we know for sure is that we still like to spend. So trying to buy stuff. So why would you in this time decide to pull back? Why would you in this time decide not to show up as your whole self? If you're honest with yourself, you have a captive audience right now, because almost all of us are home. But that's for those of us who choose to be home. But this is not the time to stop showing up as your whole self. And I would be remiss not to touch on this, because I meant to touch on it earlier, but we transitioned when we were talking about people who are home, but it's not a home. It's not a safe space. Yeah. I also think not just about our homeless population, but I think about sex workers. I think about how this is a difficult time, particularly like if you're a dancer, because I know here in Atlanta, because you're in Atlanta too. So we home of the strip clubs. Magic City is closed, y'all. Magic City is closed.
And they're doing virtual lap dances.
Yes, they're doing virtual lap. So everybody's figuring out a way to still get done what they need to get done in order to continue making income. But it's difficult because that's just dancers. Like they're going to find a way they can become cam girls, or there are alternatives for them to still earn income. But straight like sex workers who do their escorts, or they do their work on the streets, or whatever, like those are not people who have the ain't no 401k in that.
Right. Stimulus check for that.
Ain't no short-term disability, no long-term
Right.
disability, no unemployment, nothing, because it has not been decriminalized in most places. So you have that population who is now trying to figure out, okay, how do I get another job, or how do I take care of myself, and like, what you gonna put on a resume? If you've been doing sex work all these years, like, what are you going to put down on a resume? And so now, you're a person of a certain age who's pretty much been a ghost as far as the career system is concerned. What do we do for those folks?
Yeah.
And so when I think about the way that church can still be the church, the way the church can still give and help for our community, I think about like, how do we feed those folks? How do we just get some people in the church just to donate into a small fund, even they put $1 to $5? How can we feed the people that we know are impacted by this? How do we still be effective? Because if the saints still want to get together, they're still bound, gagged, and determined to get together. It might as well be in service of the community and not for the vainglory of saying, I went to church and we had a worship experience. Baby, you could do that in your car. If you just need to forsake not yourselves the assembling of the saints, get together with the saints and actually start to do work that is impactful to the community around us. Because our sex workers still need help. Our seniors still need help. Our drug addicts still need help. Our homeless folks still need help. Our children, there are babies who were getting fed every day they went to school, and now that they're not out of school, there are still like some schools who obviously are coming up, with feeding programs and whatnot, but that ain't the case for everywhere. And everybody can't get to the school. So how do we feed them? I know in my neighborhood group, for my neighborhood here in Atlanta, we had folks on there bartering, like, hey, I got limes. What you got? I got this. I got, like, we've gotten to that system now. Because the reality is we're also exposing the fact that currency means nothing if you have nothing to exchange it for.
That's it.
So you can have all this money right now, but you can't go nowhere and shop. All the stores are closed. Most exchanges are closing. So it's kind of like, what, you got to figure out new and creative ways. And so I think that's kind of my thing for the saints who just really need to get together for the sake of having a community. If you just really feel the need to gather, try to follow the CDC guidelines, get together in small groups, 10 or less, and then go out and feed people. Go out and help folks. Go out and see about your senior members, because they need that community. If you don't do nothing but set them up so that they can make calls to people, video calls, so somebody can see them and put eyes on them. What can we do that is not self-serving? Because let's be honest, these churches that still insist upon having worship services, Sunday morning services, Wednesday, that's self-serving. That's about us. It's about making us as the parishioner feel good. It's about making the preacher feel useful. We're not serving the people. The Bible says go out to the highways and the hedges and compel them to come. The Bible says a lot of things about giving of ourselves and what should we do except walk humbly, do justice. Like, we're supposed to do all of these things. Like this whole selfish bullshit around, like, it's just about me and it's all about me. This really individualism faith, which I really fucking hate. See, now we done got too far in the interview. Now to start dropping F-bombs.
No, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I've been talking about the collective and how important the collective is going to be in this season.
But so many people don't have a collective idea of Christ. It's not a collective approach to Christ. It's not a collective ideology. It's about the individual. God saved me. God favored me. God chose me. God got me covered. It's all about me, 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 me. Lord, I am unworthy. Think about our worship songs. Lord, I am unworthy. Lord, there's no one like you. Woe is me, oh God. Like, it's always about the individual. At what point do we recognize that is not at all what God called us to do? We're so busy working, and that individualism comes from a deep-rooted capitalism seed. It comes from that deep-rooted Protestant ethic that the better we're doing, and this is a real thing. It's by Max Weber, a German philosopher. He wrote a book in early 1900s called like the Protestant Ethic. And
Yeah.
so the basic tenets of it is that ethic teaches you that the more blessed you are is the more favored and closer to God you are. So your wealth and your holdings and all of those things, if you are a more wealthy person, that means you have been doing better, and you have a better relationship with God, and you're more favored and more chosen, and all these things, right? Kind of really the roots of favorite theology. And so here we find ourselves with people still approaching to this day in that GIF form. To this day, still approaching it. Like, that's how it's supposed to be. And it's just not. We have such an individualistic approach to faith that this is also part of the reason why we don't know how to do church now. We don't know how to do community now, because it has always been about me and mine and what's inside my church sanctuary. And that's all that matters, is my church community. Not the community at large, not the body of Christ, not the all the big terms we like to use to pretend we're doing community. But we've really been so individually focused on me. God, pray for me. And so now we don't know how to deal, because this is a time where it's not just about you. Literally everything we're doing in quarantine is not about us. It's about protecting the people around us.
Absolutely. It's so funny because I think earlier this morning I posted on my Instagram story the fact that some of y'all have never made meaningful contributions to a group project in its show.
Listen.
The only assignment is
stay your ass home. That's it. Stay ass home. Wash your hands. Wash your hands. Stay home. That ain't hard. It's not hard. It's not hard. But like legit, I just had a good friend of mine text me and was like, I've tested positive. I'm in self-quarantine. He's got a newborn. So now he's got to be away from his newborn for 2 weeks. And got to hope and pray that he didn't expose them, you know, his newborn and his child's mother, like, didn't expose them in the process of figuring out, oh snap, this is not just a common cold. I have COVID. And so when you think about things like that, for me, is what makes it so much larger than just me. But a lot of people aren't approaching it that way, because it's kind of like we're treating quarantine in the sense of, okay, that means don't go hang out with people I don't know, but I can go chill with my homies who do know. Like,
we still gonna have a kickback in the backyard. We still gonna have a cookout. Like
that's
party.
not what this means. Like, it's not a matter of cleanliness. It's not a matter of hygiene per se. Yeah. Like, that's part of keeping safe. But it's just a matter of, like, we now know it's airborne. We know it lives longer on surfaces than we thought it did. Like, at first they thought that virus only lived on surfaces for like 9 days. And then they got that shit back and realized the virus had been on there for 17 days in the cabins.
Wow.
And so, like, we're learning these new things every day. And so you'll go around and you're asymptomatic all this time, and bloop, 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 suddenly you're symptomatic. And you don't know how many people you've come in contact with, so you can't pinpoint where you got it from. So no, it's not just going to go kick it with people that you do know already, because there are so many people who you're going to touch on your way out that you're not thinking about. If you stop at the gas station, now you touch the gas pump and somebody else has touched the gas pump and you touching the card receptacle. Like, there's so much. It's all you have to do is stay your ass home and not die. Like, Black people love to say we don't have nothing else to do except stay black and die. Like, right now, it's just all you do is stay black, stay home, and not die yet. That's all you got to do.
That's the only assignment.
But we're struggling with it because we're just so used. I think this stillness is so needed. I think this exposure that's happening is so needed. But even people who are in comfortable situations, so they're not under threat of domestic violence, they're not under threat of any kind of harm in their home, people still don't want to stay home because we're not culturally used to silence. Right. We're not culturally used to slowing down, particularly how American capitalism is built. We are so constantly on this thing of, I need to be productive.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how to rest. We don't know how to just say, okay, let me be still in this moment. And so we're getting restless, which is why we're out here doing reckless things like coming into community in ways that we shouldn't be coming into community. But I think it's largely because most people are not ready for the reckoning that happens in silence. There is
Right.
a reckoning that happens in stillness. There is a
Yeah.
unpacking and deconstruction of self, of who you've always thought yourself to be when you sit still. And I don't think most people are ready for that. But particularly in a time where it's forced and you don't have
Mhm.
anything to distract you from it. So I can't just sit here and think about myself for a little bit and be like, ooh, well, fuck this. I'm gonna go hit up the club. Like you can't do that now. You've got to sit there with the silence and all that it brings, which is another reason why I believe in my heart we're never going to be the same as we were before this,
I completely agree.
individually or collectively.
I completely agree. Now, Danielle, there are a lot, and we touched on this a little bit, but there are a lot of Black millennials,
Yeah.
especially this platform specifically is geared toward entrepreneurs and leaders, but Black millennials in general are starting to renegotiate and navigate their relationship with divine. And
Hmm.
honestly, many have been quarantining from traditional churches, doctrines, and
Absolutely.
theologies that we were once raised with. And
Hmm.
you wrote a really incredible piece that has informed so many people about why Black millennials are leaving the church.
Yeah.
Because I think before COVID, I would hear a lot of pastors and faith leaders sort of admonish the millennials or complain about the fact that the pews are empty, and we know that after the boomers we are the largest generation,
Hmm.
right? And so I think that it is not lost upon our church leaders that when there is a dwindling population of a key demographic in your church, that signifies or signals a problem.
Right.
So for the folks who may not have gotten a chance to get their life and read that incredible, which I'll put a link to it in the show notes because I think everybody who is interested in this conversation should read that. Can you tell us about, what do you believe has led to this seemingly mass exodus from traditional churches, specifically within, the Black millennial demographic?
I believe in summation, the biggest reason is the church's refusal to evolve and to question its traditions. We do tradition for the sake of tradition. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes we cleave to those things because they make us comfortable. They bring back a familiar memory. And I think for those of us who are in this demographic, and let me actually expand that because we are the largest group behind the boomers, but we can't forget Gen X, who
Yes.
not only is a fulcrum for all of the pushback that we do as our generation, but they also are a large part of my audience. Most of my audience is actually not all millennials, just like most of my audience is not all Christian. I have a large generations X population. So, and I find that they have the same complaints about church that we do. And they have the same frustrations with the church space as we do, which is this refusal to evolve. For Gen Xers, though, just like they do in the workplace, they're so used to playing the game. Half of them don't want a bucket, and then the other half, they'll bucket in quiet with me in my inbox on the phone
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
DM, but they will not be the ones who push this kind of change in church. This is not all, but it's a large chunk of them. So what I find is that most of us are exiting the church because it has refused to evolve and adapt. You can't keep preaching about heaven anyhow, and you can't keep preaching to me about all the reasons I'm going to hell when I'm literally living a life right now that feels like I'm sitting in its deepest pits. My life is hell. Everything I'm facing feels like it's just hellfire. I'm saddled with student loan debt. So much so to the point that we constantly sit here praying every day in some kind of collective united prayer. God, please let them hack Sally Mae. God, please let them have one of these students. Like, I have never seen a more consistent prayer than God, please kill these student loan companies.
If you can don't do nothing else for me.
If you never do anything else, you would have already done enough, God, if you just go ahead and kill these student loans. Like, that's a huge weight on most of us. We are facing financial destitution. We're not able to build wealth. We are facing a time where what is becoming socially and culturally normative is still not socially or culturally normative in the church. And it doesn't make sense. It's not adding up. It's simply, we're saying it's not normal or it's not a normative because humans have decided it's a sin, it's a problematic, it's all of this. But we still have to navigate the world outside of that Sunday service, outside of that Wednesday service. And what we're learning makes cognitive sense in the world. And then when we try to marry that to what we're being taught in our faith spaces, it's not happening. So what's easier to let go? Living your life in the world or the church? Church is a much easier choice. You already, as millennials, we found community elsewhere. As millennials, to be truthful with you, to keep it 100, we found church at the brunch table.
That's it.
We found church at the club. We found church in spaces like the Unfit Christian congregation. We found churches in spaces like Slate Speak. We found churches in places like the Peak Road Chronicles with Melva Sampson. Like, we have found church in different spaces that were not the traditional space, and it speaks to us. Some of us have found spiritual sanctification outside of Christianity altogether, and it works. It aligns. It speaks to us who we are as a people. And so the church will continue to die. And at this point, I'm almost at the mindset of it might be a good time for the death, because you have to completely reimagine the way we do church. And you can't continue to do these things based on tradition. Most millennials I know, the traditions we love out of church is our musical tradition. We like the shouting. We like the predictability of it. We like all of that. It's usually the problem comes in is where the preached word happens. That's usually where most people's conflict with church happens, is that you've got a preacher up here who is only speaking to, you're going to hell, you're going to hell, you're going to hell. Women ain't this, women ain't that. You can't speak, you can't talk, you can't wear your shoulders out, your legs out. You go make Deacon Fred over here stumble, and that's a problem. But we're not speaking to Deacon Fred and his lustful spirit. We're speaking to you, woman, and you wearing your shoulders out. Like, all your women's ministries are focused on you being married and being a wife and being a mother. And you're like, okay, but I'm 21 and I really just want to get together with other Christian women or other women of a similar faith. I don't want to talk about getting married. I'm still in school, or I just finished school. I want to do my career. I want to do all these things. But that's all the women's ministry speaks to. Then you got singles ministry, where ain't nobody ever coming out with a spouse. We got the single ministry.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
I said I ain't saying that. I paused. I had to pause for that. Y'all can't hear me no more? I know you can't hear me, Courtney. Hold on. Let's see if somebody else can hear me. 1 second. What's happening? Can you hear me now? Because I can see myself talking. Uh-oh. She done left me by myself, y'all. Well, I don't want to keep talking until she comes back in. All right, so y'all can, all right, Whitney, you can hear me. Jess, you can hear me. All right, cool. So we'll wait on Courtney to come back. Lord Jesus, I was on a roll too. Lord, I hope our internet didn't go out. That would be very inconvenient at this time. Okay, Deidre can hear me. All right, so I know y'all can hear me. We just don't know what happened to Courtney's side. All right, we here. I'm still here live. I guess I'll keep preaching until Courtney comes back because she'll catch it. It's her recording, so she'll catch it. But yeah, so why are millennials exiting? It really comes down to that idea of like they're just, the church is not speaking to them. It's not speaking to their needs. It's not speaking to the life and the existence that we have right now that requires so much more than teachings around hellfire and brimstone and purity culture and all kinds of shit we've already proven that really doesn't have that much of a biblical basis and really is mostly rooted in and around a need to control human behavior. So for that, I think is why most of us have just decided, you know what? This church thing, it can't be a thing for me anymore. This space of trying to do my relationship with God and lead a religious life is not working in the church because I'm not getting what I need. It doesn't add up. It doesn't matter, or it doesn't marry in a way with what I'm learning and to know to be cognitively true within church spaces. So, or within normal spaces. I think she's messaging me on Messenger, y'all. 1 second. Okay, she said her browser crashed, y'all. Okay, I'm still talking. So yeah, so that's kind of the answer to that. I guess I'll wait. If y'all have any questions, y'all can pop up with questions now. I will wait on Courtney to come back. Yeah, Deidre, Courtney's browser just crashed, and so she's trying to reboot. She's coming back. She said she's trying to get back in now. So we all still here, just hanging in there together. But if y'all have any questions while we're waiting on her, I'll be happy to answer them. We're just waiting on her to pop back in. She says she's trying now. She'll be back anytime soon. In the meantime, like I said, you got any questions? Pop in. I'll answer them while we're waiting on her. I'm going to turn my camera off, though.
Okay.
Oh, I waited too long.
Okay. Oh, gosh. I don't even know what happened.
I finished answering the question, so when you go back and edit it, you have to.
Thank you so much. I don't even know. Look, that old...
That old browser devil tried to come for you, girl.
That old snaggle tooth.
I literally said, I was like, I hope our internet didn't crash. And when you text me, it was like, my browser crashed. I was like, oh,
it crashed on me. And you were saying so many good things, and I missed the last couple of minutes, but and I'm sure that those who are still able to tune in, who are still here, got their life, and I'm gonna go back and listen to what you said because I know I know you dropped some gems.
I did what I could.
So you have a community with over 3,000 people that you mentioned called the Unfit Christian Congregation, which I am a proud member of.
Thank you.
Can you talk about how that community has served those who are in the midst of or who have already started to navigate and renegotiate their spiritual realities and conclusions?
So I'm gonna try to answer this question without crying because I get kind of emotional when I think about it. I want to preface this by saying that to any business owner that's listening, any entrepreneur who is thinking about starting a business, I still call you an entrepreneur. You're just one in waiting. If you're thinking about starting a business, if you're seasoned in what you're doing, no matter where you are, I want to say this: there is somebody who's waiting on your yes. There's somebody who is waiting on you to say yes to stepping into who you fully are, because their freedom depends on it. Their best life depends on you saying yes. When I think about just the launch of Unfit Christian anyway. I started in 2016 with the blog. Now, I had already been using the Unfit Christian hashtag actually since about 2014 on my personal page, my personal Facebook page. And so finally people got tired of me writing so many long form blog statuses that I just started writing long form on an actual blog. And so that year, 2016, I actually lost my dad in January 2016. My father was a preacher, died at 47 years old of kidney failure. So a lifelong diabetic, lifelong illness, all these things. It was just, it was pretty normal. So, or a normal experience for me to have a sick father throughout my childhood.
Yeah.
And so, that year I launched Unfit Christian in April, and I started the digital space, the group, in May of 2016, largely just kind of just like as a supplemental feeder group for the blog itself. And it took on a life of its own. I never imagined it would turn into a space. I never imagined with Unfit Christian anyway that I would turn into what I like to call a reluctant pastor, but people really actually do see me as a pastor, and they do give me that honor and reference and look at me for their spiritual leadership. And so when I launched the group, it was very small. I just added all of my friends.
That's how it starts.
Who voluntarily came. So I wasn't just adding people who didn't want to be there. These are people who had been supporting my work. And then, like, you know, it just came. I have literally grown. I've never advertised it in terms of like paying for ads. I've never had anybody else promo it. It has, everything that we have done to this point has been natural growth. We're at 3,000 plus people, and that's with me having a pretty nice selective process because we have a whole entrance thing, and not everybody who applies gets in. Like, we try to make sure the space remains a brave space for engaging conversations, for challenging conversations, and for fun, because we have a whole lot of fun in in the congregation. Yes. But the reason it has taught me is that somebody's waiting on my yes is the transformations that have happened. I have a couple. So yes, I do have a couple who met through the congregation, and they're engaged to be married actually in September this year. One of the partners, it's a same-sex relationship. One of the partners, when she came into my space, she internally knew that she was a lesbian or identified as a lesbian, but was really kind of still grappling with what that meant for her in terms of her faith walk. And because of the conversations that I allowed and curated and led and contributed to all of these things, and being able to take one-on-one time with her, like, we moved very quickly from, I know this is who I am, but I'm not sure this fits, to like, I know this is who I am, it doesn't affect my faith, and this is where it's compatible. Like, I was able to help her transform from this idea that they had to be, they couldn't be mutually exclusive. Like, these things walk hand in hand. There's no reason you can't be a Christian and be fully, you know, who you are as a person, as a lesbian, as a gay person, queer person, trans person, whatever your identity, gender, or sexual, you can be your whole self coming to the cross. And when she met her partner, it was at an outing that we had. So we do have get-togethers where we take it from the digital space into the physical space. And that particular outing, we went to dinner and the strip club. And so we found love in the strip club. Like, they met there. And because the funny thing is, neither one of them live in Atlanta. But they both traveled here for that particular event. And now they are engaged to be married. They just bought their first home together, all of these things. And I use them as an example, not just because they're my babies, but because I look at that and say, had I not said yes, would they have found each other? Would they both be comfortable in who they are firmly, both as their faith identity and their sexual identity? Would they be, where they are now had I not said yes? And I have multiple stories where people who came in one way and they walk out a whole other. I have people who came in evangelical and walked out agnostic. I had people who came in, completely, I'm all purity culture this, I'm purity culture that, and saved myself into marriage, and I start breaking down sex and sexuality with faith, and the next thing I know, they're like, I forget me some dick. So, like, I'm proud to have been part of those transformations. I have some that are, just less, less dramatic. For me, honestly, believe it or not, my proudest moments when I think about the work that I've done with this congregation is actually people who say to me, I'm an atheist, I'm agnostic, but the way you talk about God makes me at least have more respect for the faith and for the concept than I ever did before. Or when people tell me, had I met you before I chose agnosticism or atheism, I would have reconsidered. And my biggest thing is I don't proselytize. So I'm never out here going, well, you should reconsider and come unto Christ. Like, no, I trust that you know what's best for your spiritual health. And I trust that you know what's best for you as a person. And so I don't need you to be a Christian in order for me to pray for you, to care about you, to take care of you, to look after you, to be your pastor. There are people who, again, like I said, identify as such, but still will call me pastor. Don't know why, but like they do. And so for me, it's important to be that person who bridges that gap. It's important for me to be that person who, when you come to that fork in the road where you're trying to decide how do you continue to acclimate God as part of your life and still have rational reason, logic, and all of these things, those things matter to me. And it matters for me to be that person. So doing the Unfit Christian congregation has given me the opportunity to be that person to many people who have passed through its doors. Most people are still there, some aren't, but there's no love lost. I've been able to touch people, physically. I've walked with people through chemo treatments, to death, to loss of a spouse, to unfortunately I have more widows than I care to have in my space who became widowed in the time that they were a part of the congregation. People who lose pregnancies. I've actually had to go through the death of a congregation member. So we've experienced all the things that you would experience in a physical church, which is why at this point I decided to stop denying that it really is a church space for many people because we still do church, but in just such a non-traditional, way more progressive, way more forward fashion that I think has made a positive impact on so many people. And I'm glad to have had the opportunity to do it.
And I, for one, just want to say thank you for your work, because I know that this work is not easy. It does not come without its fair share of challenges. It does not come without its fair share of isolation, right? And because anytime you are zigging while other people are zagging, if you will, you're always crazy. You're always the oddball. And you're always the heretic.
I'll say the heretic. That's been my one, is the heretic.
You're always those labels until things like this happen, pandemic, crisis, whatever happens, and it hits close to home. And then suddenly, more people see, oh God, okay, I get it, right? And so that being said, have you experienced any backlash? And if so, how has it fueled your mission?
I feel like
you're like, girl, yes.
I feel like if I'm not getting backlash, I ain't doing it right. I must not be challenging people enough if I'm not getting backlash. I will say when I first started and like the backlash was really heavy, like it was hard because I wasn't prepared for it. Because I'm like, I'm just speaking my truth. I'm just speaking the truth as I see it, as I know it. I'm not asking you to believe as I do. I'm not requiring that you do these things. But as I matured, I realized that a lot of that came from a place of you're challenging me in a way I'm not comfortable with. And your truth resonates with me in a way that scares me. And my first reaction, of course, is offense. My first reaction, of course, is to start defending my traditions, my truth that I haven't done the time or the work to interrogate, but it is the only truth that I know and can accept right now. So once I understood that, I was able to deal with it better. I will say, as my community has grown larger, I have been more insulated, if that makes sense, from a
Mhm.
lot of criticism, because now I have people who believe in me and the work that I do so much that they're willing to either shield me from it so I never find out about it, or if I do, they've already spoken up. But also, there's just a matter of right now, currently, there are people who are like, shit, she was right. I maybe should listen to her. And so that's kind of always my thing with folks that encounter my work is like, if you have a beef with it, usually you're just not ready to hear it. And the thing is, I always go, I'll be here when you're ready. Whenever
Yeah.
you get ready, whenever you decide that this is something that you really are ready to engage, I'll be here for it. But absolutely, I get backlash, but not to the point where it cripples me. Excuse me for the ableist language, but not to the point where it cripples me to from being able to do my work.
That's great. And I think it takes a lot of fortitude in order to continue on, because I hear you and I
Mm-hmm.
feel you. And again, I see you as a shining example of someone who is really uplifting the collective, someone who is leading a community in such a heart-centered way. Ever since I've encountered you and your content in the community, I've always felt this sense of authenticity, and I've always felt like you've had a heart for the people. And I can't say, unfortunately, that every person that I've encountered that has called themselves called has done the same. So again, thank you.
You're
Now,
welcome.
I want a couple more questions
Okay.
for you. I want to talk about what thought leadership looks like for you, because I consider you to be a thought leader. There are obviously over 3,000 in your congregation that consider you to be a thought leader, plus, all your other platforms, all the other people who follow you on your platforms combined. So what does thought leadership look like for you?
It is very much as you described me, with this sense of being people centered, heart centered, concerned about the people. Anytime I write something, be it on my private profile, the Facebook page for Unfit Christian, in the group itself, on anything I post words to, I'm always mindful of how these words will fall and impact. I try to be very responsible with what I'm saying. So I try to make sure it's fact based. I try to make sure that I can pull receipts if I need to. But more importantly, I try to make sure I'm saying something that matters. I'm not somebody who believes in having something to say just to have something to say. I'm not a hot takes for hot takes sake.
Yeah.
Usually, most times you'll find something is happening. I'll wait a few days before I even make a comment on it.
Yeah.
But and I obviously am thought of as a thought leader because people will literally tag me in their own statuses and go, "I'm waiting on Danyelle to tell us what she think about so and so," and I'm like, "Child, I'm not gonna tell you nothing because I ain't thinking about nothing." But the reality is, people do look to me to have a thought on that. So I have, over 3,200 people in the Facebook group, but across all the platforms, I have well over 25,000 people who encounter my work just as a straight up follower. So I am ever mindful of that. And even if they're not following me, somebody who does and shared my content, or they screenshot and send it here, like, I'm always astounded sometimes. I can just write something off the top of my head about how I feel. Like when I was writing the Renew series posts, one of the ones I wrote reached over 100,000 people in 24 hours.
Yeah.
And so when I'm mindful of these things, I am very careful about what I say, not because I want to lack authenticity, not because I am worried about ad dollars or sponsor dollars, because neither one of those factor into my business model, but because when I say something, I know it holds weight. When I say something, I know that because it came from me, there are people who are more likely to believe it. And I know when I say something, the intent and the spirit that I put behind those words, what I invoke with what I say, regardless of what I'm talking about, is spirit, let this be influential in their lives. Let it be transformative. Let it be impactful. Let it plant a seed that causes them to think deeply, that causes them to interrogate their own belief system around this so that we can make transformative change. That is always how I approach anything I write, even if it's hilarious, even if it's just like either me being very formal in my written voice or just me being like, y'all know how I love to spell things out. And y'all know how I like to use colorful language. So if you follow me, so no matter what kind of language I'm using, I always have the intent to be transformative and impactful. And so being a thought leader means not just saying things just to say it, but taking it beyond being just your thought and thinking about how your thought can impact the thoughts of others, and understanding that everything that is accomplished in this life starts with a thought. Yes. So if you're going to be a leader of that, make sure you're leading people to something that is impactful and transformative versus just something that makes your ego feel good because you got a lot of likes and shares.
Now that's a word. That's a word. Let me drop something in the collection plate right quick, because that's real. And thank you for that definition. Now, what thought leaders have positively impacted your journey?
Oh man. So she's gonna hate that I shout her out because she's so humble. But Candace Simpson, Rainbow Campus, Candace Simpson in New York. She's at Concord Baptist. Her mother, Reverend Emma Jordan Simpson, her dad, Reverend Simpson, that whole family, they're so inspirational to me. That's just one set of people. They just happen to all be related. I love Auntie Il Nana. I don't think she be helping nobody life or fixing it, but I love that she has so much like she's got so much like auntie-isms to her, and I just really love the intent behind what she does. So I don't necessarily always agree with her methodology, but I love the intent behind what she does. You can tell that she genuinely does have a heart to see people do and be better and be their best selves. Other people who inspire me, Shirley Chisholm. You got Barbara Jordan. I love politicians, particularly Black women politicians. I love the way they carry themselves. I love the timbre, the resonance of their voices. I love their conviction to do what is necessary, not just for us as Black women, but we try to do the best for everybody around us. So love them. Preacher wise, a lot of my preacher influences are actually not going to be like huge preachers that people know. I like a lot of progressive faith leaders. I know I named a lot of women because I believe in Black women.
Yes.
so
yes.
Honestly, a lot of my inspiration comes from other Black women who know the lived experience of what it takes to live our lives, but also tend to have the collective and the communal in mind. And so those people will inspire me. The Nat Bishop. Do you follow Nat Bishop on Instagram?
I do follow the Nat Bishop. I love the Nat Bishop.
Love what Trisha's doing there.
Yes.
It is so imperative. Jade Perry. I love Jade's work. Jade is a churchy mystic. So basically she has, like me, a Pentecostal charismatic experience as her foundation, but she also does a lot of mysticism work. So she actually is my personal tarot reader, but she reads tarot and oracle cards. She does a lot of like herbal, classes, so like putting together herbal teas and herbal remedies and all that stuff. I love how she combines the two. I love how she exposes the connection between hoodoo and Black Christian faith traditions. Love that work. It inspires me to continue to talk about it publicly too. I talk a lot about the church's perception of witchcraft. So
we have to have you back on to talk about that, because absolutely. I want to dig into that.
Oh, that's a whole episode by
It
itself,
is a
girl.
whole episode, right? So we
So
gotta have Pastor
I'm inspired by a lot of Black women. Kim McCarter, Stephanie, people who know Stephanie know what I'm talking about. Like,
Yeah.
just like so many Black women who stand in their fullness of who they are,
Mhm.
and show up to their communities and they lead their spaces, because that's exactly what I choose to do every time I show up for Unfit Christian. Like, I'm here. I know I'm expected to lead, and so I'm going to lead you the best way I know how, but with humility to understand that I may not have all the answers. But I think because I have established that rapport with my folks, it's okay when I don't have the answers. Nobody expected me to have them all the time anyway, but they respect the answers that I do give. So I'm deeply inspired by thought leaders who are Black women.
Yes, me too. And so I know that as a thought leader, you're constantly not only having to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on, but you almost have to have a visionary kind of approach to the work that you
Mhm.
do. So let me ask, what's next for you?
I always have to be about 2 or 3 steps ahead. And I actually do tend to find I'm 2 or 3 steps ahead. People just last year on national platforms started having the conversation about millennial exodus. I wrote that piece in 2016, 2017, something like that. So I was
Mhm.
already 2 or 3 ahead before people started having this conversation nationally. Now here we are with the digitization of church. I've been talking about digitizing church since 2016. So I kind of feel like I'm always on the cusp. I'm always ahead. So now, kind of like the next big thing for me is how do we, okay, let me preface this by saying that one of the missing components about my digital church space is that there's still the human desire to get together in community locally. So, how
Mhm.
do we bridge that gap? How do we still give people what they need in terms of having digital space for people who can't meet locally, or who, your states apart, so y'all might never meet up locally, but you want to have that digital connection, and then bridging the digital space with the physical space. How do we do so in a way that doesn't feel like church as usual? So that's my next big thing is, do we look at just having series of, brunch and Bible study, because that's what we like to do. Brunch, booze, and Bible.
Brunch, food, survival. I love
So,
it.
like, how do we do that? That's kind of my next big thing, is making it tangible for those who need tangible space, but
Mhm.
blowing it up so it looks nothing like the way we've done church traditionally. Like, if the Rona, little Miss Rona, and her feelings had messed it up. I want to get together with like an Easter thing. I've been wanting to do like a day party for Easter for the longest, like where you mix down like all the '90s gospel cuts with some nice
Yes.
'90s R&B, some nice hip hop, whatever. Mix it all together. Not one strict genre anyway. I want to do a day party that way, for Easter, because I'm like, we've all heard the same warmed over Easter sermon every Easter. Jesus died, Jesus rose, praise the Lord, let's have communion. Like, now that Jesus is off the cross, now what? That's kind of always my position, is okay, we've gone through all this, now what? Jesus is resurrected, now what? How do we go on to fulfill Jesus's words when Jesus said we'll go on to do greater works than he did? How do we fulfill Jesus's promises when we are supposed to, so how do we do those things? We can't keep getting stuck in this comfortable traditional narrative
Right.
of what tickles our emotions about Jesus rising from the grave and defeating death and all. Like, that's all great. It's wonderful shouting material. But when we're done shouting, the world still needs to be impacted. The world still needs to have the oppressions that marginalize us in so many avenues. For me, I'm a Black woman. I am a fat bodied woman. I am someone who grew up, socioeconomically disadvantaged. I have all of these, isms that impact my life. Now that Jesus has come off the grave and off the cross, what now? How do we do the work to dismantle that? So that's kind of my biggest thing, is how do I bring together tangible community to do in-person things that completely disrupt the way we've always done church, while also meeting the needs of the parishioners who would be participating. So that's my next big thing.
I love that. And that is why you are a thought leader. Thank you so much for
You're
having
welcome.
this conversation with me today, Danyelle.
Thank
Now,
you.
if you enjoyed this conversation and it inspired you in some way, I'd love to hear about it and know your number one takeaway. So take a screenshot of you listening, post it to your Instagram stories, and tag me at the Courtney Bowden and Danyelle. Where can we find you, Danyelle, online?
You can find me on all platforms at Unfit Christian. So that's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I am on all three of those. I'm on TikTok too, but I don't be making none. But y'all can follow me on there if y'all want to. I'm at Unfit Christian there too.
And I'm actually going to put that information right here on the screen so that people can connect with you.
Yeah.
Because, listen, y'all, I'm telling you, this is but the tip of the iceberg. You definitely want to connect with Pastor Danny because she has a relevant word
So
for the
if you
people.
want to join me here in Atlanta in person, we are doing our first conference, Faith Over Fiction. It's the Gathering by Unfit Christian. That is faithoverfiction.com to purchase a ticket for that. So a lot of the conversations you heard me touch on today, we'll be having those conversations in person with different workshop leaders. So it won't be just me talking all the time. We're going to have a panel on queer identity and church membership. So how queer people are marginalized within the church, how the church can do better by our queer family, about navigating religious baggage when you are a same gender loving person or you're pansexual or anything that falls outside of being straight. We're going to have big conversations about sex. I'm going to lead a workshop called The Recovering Celibate. So for people who have practiced celibacy or have been taught anything around like purity culture and you're trying to figure out how you could be saved, single, and having sex without guilt, I'll be, leading a workshop on that. We're going to have a Black and Kink one-on-one. That's another sex workshop. We're doing a lot. So if all that sounds fun to you, join me here in Atlanta, October 2nd through 3rd, unless Miss Rona got other plans. Hopefully we're all out of quarantine by the end. We are considering a virtual option if that, doesn't happen. But anyway, for now, faithoverfiction.com, register today. You can put like a little nice, cute little down payment down. You ain't got to pay full price. Put a down payment down and you can pay the rest later. But I hope to see you in Atlanta if you want to meet me in person.
Thank you so much. Now, if you want more content and conversations like these, I want you to go ahead and subscribe and review the show. This is a digital platform that I've created for Black entrepreneurs and leaders who just want to understand how they can increase their impact, influence, and revenue related to the work that they do in the world. And today's conversation is so foundational to that because I think spirituality, faith matter in the work that we do. And so if this episode spoke to your soul and you want to hear more conversations and content like this, I encourage you to go ahead, subscribe and leave a review in iTunes. Think like a thought leader. If you have any questions, I'm here to help. Email any questions you have to thinklikeathoughtleader@gmail.com. I do love taking listener questions, and I might even use your question for a future podcast episode. Thank you again, Danyelle, for joining us. Thank you, everyone who joined us live. And if you're watching the replay, thank you for listening to this entire podcast and watching the entire podcast. And until next time, bye.
Bye.